Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The British government has ordered a probe into foreign financial interference in politics as the government cited the case of a former senior member of Reform UK who was jailed for taking bribe of $53,732 to promote Russian interests in the European Parliament. European leaders have signed the convention and has launched a Hague-based International Claims Commission to assess Ukraine's claims over Russia and Ukraine war, with more than 86,000 claims filed and the World Bank estimating $524 billion needed for reconstruction. The host broadcaster of the next Eurovision Song Contest, Austria's ORF, has said that it will not ban the Palestinian flag from the audience or drown out booing during Israel's performance. The 70th edition of the contest in May will have 35 entries, the smallest number of participants since 2003, amid boycott over Israel's participation. Italy's ruling parties are urging caution in the use of frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine, according to a draft parliamentary resolution saying the impact on state finances should be carefully assessed. This comes as the EU assesses using the frozen Russian assets to back a loan for Kyiv's military and civilian needs. Philippine immigration says the father and son behind Australia's deadly Bondi Beach attack spent most of November in the country. Officials say the father entered the Philippines as an Indian national before returning to Australia. Thailand says Cambodia will be the first to announce a ceasefire to halt more than a week of deadly border clashes. Bangkok says Cambodia, which it calls the aggressor, must also cooperate sincerely in border demining efforts. Myanmar's junta said that detained former leader Aung San Suu Kyi is in good health despite her serving a 27-year prison sentence. Kyi, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, was detained after a 2021 military coup that ousted her elected civilian government and sparked a civil war. According to astronomy reports, interstellar comet 3I Atlas will make its closest approach to Earth on 19 December, giving a final and best chance for ground-based observations to study the rare object before it leaves the solar system forever. Now we start this hour with Netherlands. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine is facing difficulties in meeting its financial needs and a European Union's decision to use frozen Russian assets to support Kyiv is very crucial. Speaking in The Hague during a joint press conference with acting Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof, Zelensky has said that using the Russian frozen assets would help Kyiv to balance out a decrease in support from some of its partners. He has also noted that Russia must be held responsible for crime of aggression against Ukraine. Let's listen into what the Ukrainian president has shared.
Україні точно не просто. І точно є фінансові виклики. І ви бачите, як ми працюємо. Не всі раді формату, як можна використовувати frozen assets, так? Але сьогодні frozen assets, вони могли би, напевно, якось збалансувати деякі зменшення в тих чи інших країнах. Тому що це була б дійсно така серйозна підтримка. Я не бачу без цієї підтримки можливості стояти міцно. І в Майамі мене там не буде, будуть переговорні групи, вони будуть мати фідбек від русських, я думаю, і будуть проговорювати кілька документів і гарантій безпеки, і економічне відновлення, так, і 20 пунктів цієї рамкової угоди. Складно сказати, на скільки років це, ми це ще не обговорюємо. Чи це буде обмежено якимись роками, ті чи інші гарантії, або ні. Єдине, дуже важливо для нас було, що повинно бути проголосовано в Конгресі. Ми віримо, що такі гарантії будуть.
Now, for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Ben Aris. He's a former Moscow bureau chief of the Daily Telegraph. Joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how do you think how aligned are you, Ukraine and Russia, as well as comparing it to U.S.?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. What was the
question?
So
I wanted to ask, how do you think how aligned are you, Ukraine and Russia, in terms of what U.S. has proposed?
The Kremlin, the Kremlin is very aligned with what the U.S. is proposing, in so much as there's a real peace deal on the ground, and that Trump and Putin themselves discussed it in Alaska and thrashed out a framework deal which they both agreed on. And that then was taken further by Vitkov, the envoy, and developed in detail with Kirill Dmitriev, the envoy on the Russian side. And so the number of points between them, I mean, there's still many things that they disagree on. Nevertheless, the deal is more or less done. The problem now is it's gone to the next phase and it's been put in front of Zelensky. And Zelensky has lots of problems with this deal, but really, of all the 27 points that are left on the list, the two are causing the main trouble are an agreement over security deals for Ukraine post-war, and at the same time the question of land. Putin is insisting and not backing down that Ukraine give up all of the Donbass region, and Zelensky can't agree to that. At the moment, of the Donbass, there's only about 15% that the Russians don't already actually control. But it means that the Ukrainian forces would have to withdraw completely and give up particularly what's known as the fortress line, a very heavily defended line that the Ukrainians built. And Zelensky's not willing to do that. So despite all the progress, particularly here in Berlin, where he was just yesterday and the day before, we've reached an impasse now over this question of land, and it's going to be very difficult to resolve. Basically, Zelensky's going to have to decide if he's willing to do that, and militarily that puts him in a very weak position, and moreover his population are adamant that he shouldn't give up any land, that Zelensky just wants to freeze it along the line of contact now, and so we're now waiting to see what happens, because time's running out. He has to make a decision, and very soon. Otherwise, the war will just continue. Putin will walk away. Trump will walk away.
So, how long can we say that Zelensky has, and also, like you rightfully mentioned, all the sticking points between Ukraine and Russia now. So, how close are we to a ceasefire between them?
We're very close. I mean, really, if Zelensky, my feeling is if Zelensky turned around tomorrow and said, right, we retreat entirely from the Donbass, and we give the whole of that region to Russia, and Putin's already agreed in the other two regions that they've occupied in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, Putin's already agreed to freeze it along the line of contact, which is what Zelensky's asking for. However, as I say, that's a big ask. It's just one last thing left to do. And Zelensky has to make a choice. I mean, basically it boils down to, if he refuses to give up his land, then the war will continue. Trump will walk away and end all aid that America is still giving, which is not much, but end that completely. And then Zelensky has to look to the Europeans, and can they supply me with weapons? Can they supply me with enough money to keep fighting? And the trouble is, both of those are very uncertain. The EU is not invested into weapons production and doesn't have the capabilities that the States does. The EU is also in economic crisis and doesn't have the money. And the money is going to be key, because without any more money, Ukraine will face an macroeconomic collapse, maybe as soon as somewhere in the first quarter of next year. And there's another very important meeting starting tomorrow, where the EU is going to vote on whether they seize the $300 billion of central bank money it has frozen in Europe, which would be enough to keep Ukraine fighting for 2 years. But that decision is going to be very difficult. A, it's illegal, and B, there's lots of EU members that actually don't want to vote through and seize this money. So we're going to see in the next 2 days, if this vote fails and the EU has no money, then I think Zelensky hasn't got a choice. He has to do the Putin deal. If they get the money, they take it, and they can fund Ukraine, then that's different. Then I think Zelensky has an option then of abandoning the US help and just sticking with the Europeans.
And, lastly, Mr. Aris, to what extent can proposed security guarantees, such as the NATO-style commitments or a European monitoring force, how do you think that would help Ukraine with lasting protection?
They're key.
Yes.
They're absolutely key. That Zelensky cannot agree to any deal without strong, real security guarantees, and by that I mean military guarantees, Article 5, like there is in NATO, whereby your allies agree to come to your military help if Russia reinvades, with boots on the ground in Ukraine, fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian forces. Now, America's actually offered that. Amazingly, Trump has offered this. It's a very strong deal, and we weren't expecting that because he's been very reluctant, but he's offered that. And he realizes he needs to offer that in order to make a deal. The problem here is that the Europeans are not offering that. They're fudging it. They haven't lived up to their promise to stand with Ukraine. And what they're offering instead is security assurances. And all that is that they're going to supply some weapons, they're going to apply some money, but if Russia reinvades, that they're not going to send any European troops to fight with Ukraine. And so that's not a security guarantee. And what Zelensky's doing now, what he's been doing the last few days, is he met with lots of European leaders. That Italy suggested it will offer an Article 5-like deal. Germany didn't. Most of the Europeans haven't. The UK hasn't. And I think he's now talking to various. I mean, in the Netherlands, they've been particularly supportive of Ukraine. The whole Nordic countries have been supportive of Ukraine. And I think he's thinking that he might be able to get some bilateral deals with the Netherlands, with Finland, with the Baltics, who will agree to fight with him and give him a true security guarantee. But without those security guarantees, he can't make a deal. He can't withdraw from it. Nothing will happen. The war will continue, and they'll fight as best they can. But they will lose. They'll be defeated in the next year.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Ben Aris for joining us today from Berlin and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to US. US officials are working on a major reorganization of the military at the request of Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth, aiming to reduce the number of 4-star generals and consolidate several international command centers, the Washington Post has reported on Monday. Under the plan, US Central Command, US European Command, and US Africa Command would be placed under a new entity called US International Command. The proposal would also cut the number of generals and admirals who report directly to Pete Hegseth. Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane is expected to present the plan to Hegseth in the coming days. Any changes would require approval from both the Pentagon chief and President Donald Trump to take effect. The plan comes shortly after the release of a national security strategy emphasizing an America First approach. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Washington, D.C. And thank you very much, Mr. Raymond, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, what are the potential benefits and risks of the reducing the number of 4-star generals in terms of military efficiency, decision-making, and civilian oversight?
Well, thanks very much for having me and allowing me to comment. It seems to me that there are really two aspects to this reorganization plan. The most important is not that which has been most prominently featured, but it is going to the very heart of the constitutional arrangement in the United States of how we govern ourselves. Under the Constitution, we've had a separation of powers. The legislature controlling the executive having authority to execute the laws, and a judiciary. What President Trump is trying to do here is to consolidate power into an authoritarian approach to government, in which the executive basically has the powers of a king and can do as he pleases. In the first Trump administration, the checks and balances worked not only to frustrate President Trump, but to provide a cadre of professionals in the national security establishment, which reined in some of his worst impulses. That, of course, has infuriated him, and he has moved forward in order to change that in his second administration. And he's changing it in a number of ways, but one of the ways is to get complete control of people in the Defense Department, which he has now renamed the War Department, who will be beholden to him. Also, to be able to do these things without the interference of Congress. Traditionally, Congress has set the laws of how the Pentagon is organized and how it operates, and then the executive, as the commander-in-chief, implements those laws. And that system is one which has been frustrating to President Trump in his authoritarian approach. The second point about the reorganization is geographical and reflects a change in perspective of the Trump administration as opposed to the perspective that the United States has had since World War II, in which it has taken a comprehensive responsibility for trying to wage peace and prosperity throughout the world. This is not the orientation of President Trump. He has hearkened back to the 19th century, in which you had great empires, a Russian empire and a U.S. empire in the Western Hemisphere. And so what he's doing is downgrading Europe, basically throwing it under the bus and leaving it to its own devices and to the mercies of Russia. He has to some degree conceded Asia to a Chinese dominated area, and he wants to dominate, much as President Monroe did in the 19th century with the Monroe Doctrine, a Western Hemisphere. And so, yes, there is a reduction in some efficiency perhaps, but the loss is an approach which provides regional expertise and relationships in South Asia, and particularly in Europe and Africa, a receding from those. So this is a very serious matter. As I say, I think the most serious part of it is an attempt for the president to have complete control and not have a cadre which he would call the deep state in the military or in the police of the United States. This is an authoritarian move, and it's a very serious matter.
So, how does this proposed reorganization align again with the America First policy strategy of President Trump, and how might consolidating these multiple combatant commands under a single U.S. international command will affect America's global military posture?
Well, it's very much in accordance with America First, as that term was used historically. America First really refers back to a time before World War II, when there were those in the United States that said we shouldn't fight against the Nazis, that we shouldn't take responsibility for Europe, that we ought to withdraw to a fortress America and concentrate on the Western Hemisphere. That is the original and now present meaning of America First. And so this reorganization is in accordance with that. The cloak for all of this, of course, is efficiency. That instead of having 12 commands, you'll have 8 commands. but the seriousness of it is not really in terms of efficiency. It is the elimination of generals and admirals who would be professionals and have an oath to the Constitution, as opposed to an oath to President Trump. So efficiency is perhaps involved, but it really is a smokescreen for the policy reorganizations, which, as you say, are contained in the America First approach to the world.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for sharing that as an international affairs expert and also former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus on to UK, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office has said that any legal action against the BBC is a matter for the broadcaster, but the government supported its independence after a lawsuit brought by US President Donald Trump. His statement comes as Trump accused the broadcaster of defamation and of violating a trade practices law, and also sued the BBC for up to $10 billion in damages over edited clips of a speech that made it appear he directed supporters to storm the US Capitol, opening an international front in his fight against media coverage he deems unfair. Meanwhile, the BBC apologized to Trump last month, but rejected his demands for compensation and disagreed that there was a basis for a defamation claim, and now the BBC has said that it will defend the lawsuit filed by US President Donald Trump against the BBC. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, what does this reveal about the current balance British public broadcasters or any broadcasters must strike between robust political scrutiny and the legal risks of editorial misjudgments, especially reporting on leaders, in this case President Trump? And do you think apologies and internal corrections are sufficient?
Well, thanks very much for allowing me to comment on this. Thank you. Throughout his career, President Trump has used the courts as not a way to seek justice, but as a part of what is called a lawfare, like warfare. And unfortunately, in the United States with our system, those who have vast resources and can hire the best lawyers can use the judicial system not simply as a way to seek resolution and justice, but as a part of an aggressive approach to fighting one's enemies. And so you see, in regard to the BBC, the use of the courts, as President Trump has done in regard to American broadcasters, CBS and others. And what happens is, because he has deep pockets and can afford good lawyers, he makes it so difficult that people bend the knee and settle. This he learned early in his private career from an attorney named Roy Cohn, and it's been his approach throughout his career. So this is a continuation of the suit against the BBC is a continuation of what he has been doing to try to rein in and control the narrative. He will not let rest the fact that he lost in 2020, that as Senator Mitch McConnell said, he lit the match and was responsible really for the storming of the Capitol to try to overturn the results of that election. He will not let that rest. And he therefore is suing the BBC as a part of that approach. In normal times, what you have suggested, an apology and a correction for really what are relatively minor aspects of the editing of the Panorama show by BBC would be enough. But that's not in accordance with the strategic approach of using the courts in the United States under lawfare to wage warfare, if you will, against what President Trump considers to be his enemies.
Right. Thank you very much for that deep insight. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Raymond Vickery for joining us as an international affairs expert, as also former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce from Washington, D.C. Now we move on to our next news. Overnight clashes in Iran's southern province of Kerman has killed at least 3 security personnel and a civilian, the Revolutionary Guards have said in a statement. The statement promised intelligence and operational measures to identify and decisively deal with the perpetrators of the crime. The city's Fahraj is closest to the restive southeastern province of Sistan-Balochistan, which borders Pakistan and Afghanistan and has long been a flashpoint for clashes between security forces and armed groups, including drug traffickers and separatists. Now we move on to our next news to India. A major breakthrough has been reported in the Goa nightclub fire case in which 25 people were killed. The club owners, Gaurav and Saurabh Luthra, have been deported from Thailand, brought back to India and formally arrested. After arrival at Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport, custody was taken by the Goa police following immigration clearance. Arrest formalities were completed at the airport and the accused were later produced before the Patiala courthouse in Delhi. Transit remand is being sought to allow the brothers to be taken to Goa for further investigation. The charges are being described as serious and grave, with allegations that the nightclub was operated without valid licenses and required permissions. The arrests are being seen as a significant step in the probe as investigations continue into safety lapses and regulatory violations linked to one of Goa's deadliest nightclub fires. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.